So we've been about a month into our work in transitioning to online teaching, and so I thought it'd be a good time to talk about getting some feedback from your students. Always good to do this on an interim basis rather than let it go to the end of the year, because if you don't get it now, you don't get a chance to update your course and improve along the way. So let's talk about student feedback and how it can help us in our online classes. There's really two ideas that we want to focus in on here. One is that feedback does just what you think it might do for us. As we said, it gives you a chance to take a look at what you've planned and what you've deployed as a course and ask for those that are using it, your students, to give you some ideas on how to improve it. If you're willing to gather their feedback, you can use it as a basis for improvement, and that's a good thing. An even better thing is that it also allows you to demonstrate to the students that you're present in this course and that you value their input, and that builds engagement. And that level of engagement is one of the key predictors of course success for students. So feedback's going to do two things for us. One, help us improve the course just in its bare bones and constructive approach, but it's also going to help us get these students engaged and give them a better chance for success as they go through the course. Now, when courses are evaluated, online courses are evaluated, there are a number of different areas that evaluators focus on. For our purposes, I've kind of listed some of them out as a way to think about the course. One area would be organization. Have you organized it in some reasonable fashion, be that by modules, by days, by units, that allows students to see the course as presented in some rational and organized fashion? The second thing is ease of navigation. Can they maneuver through the course as you've put it up on your learning management system, in this case Schoology, and make their way through it in a way that helps with their workflow? Clarity is just that your instructions, the things you put up there for them to read, for them to try and make sense of, are clear and understandable. Findability is a term that relates to the ability for them to move around the page and find those resources that you've linked them to or asked them to draw upon when they complete your online assignments. Quality of content speaks to whether you've taken care to proofread things, whether things are legible, etc., etc. Multimedia is kind of a carve-out because we always want to see the use of multimedia. It is that ability of imagery or video to add richness to the content that you're delivering. Audio gives us another layer as well, as long as it doesn't compete with the text. But we always want to take a look and make sure there's some quality multimedia in your course to help direct them towards the learning outcomes. And then finally, we want to look at reasonable workload. Are you giving them enough to do, but not overwhelming them such that they give up on the course because they find it just insurmountable to accommodate or the time needed for accomplishing your tasks? There's a couple ways we can go about this. One of the best ways is using surveys, and Google Forms has a nice survey function. The bad news about Google Forms is that it takes them outside of the learning management system, unless of course you're using Google Classroom. Nice part about Google Forms, though, is that it does allow us to give the students some anonymity in their responses. Now, within most learning management systems, Schoology in particular, you can actually kind of craft an assessment and ask them questions that almost look like examination or quiz questions. And they can take a form of a yes or no, a multiple choice, ask them to rank order, although that involves a little bit of work, and also some open-ended questions to draw them out in terms of specific things you would like to ask. You can send them a form as an assignment or as an attachment to an email and ask them to fill that out and send it back to you. And one of the easiest ways to do it, although it sometimes gets groupthink going here, is to offer your students a chance to provide feedback through discussion boards. And usually I find that that's a good tool to have up for the whole course and allow them to tell you about things that aren't working the way you thought, and perhaps are a little bit more cumbersome than you might like them to be. So rather than make it a point-in-time assessment, sometimes it's helpful to use discussion boards as an ongoing tool to help drive forward the improvements in your course. Now, when it comes time to think about the approaches to go after this, the questions to ask, open-ended questions are always good. They'll give you more qualitative data to work with rather than numerical or quantitative data. The good news is that that can give richness to the things that are going on in your course. Bad news is it can take a lot of time to work through it and find a way to put it in some type of structure that allows you to draw meaning from it. Likert scales, one for worst, 5 to best, gives you the ability to kind of rank order or get a little bit of variation, if you will, in terms of the responses to specific questions. But Likert scales are good to use. Google Forms allows you to do that. So how do you find the usefulness of my course materials? 1, not useful at all, 5, very useful, that type of thing. Schoology does not really allow you to do that. Google Survey will, but there are good types of questions to think about asking. Again, anonymity, we talked about this before, is great, but it's not a deal killer if sources are not anonymous. You do need, though, to let your students know that it will not be an anonymous submission, and also reassure them that you won't use any critical comments in any type of punitive fashion. You need to give your students some time to think about this as well. So if you're going to deploy a feedback mechanism, make sure they know ahead of time that it's coming, so they can think about the course and begin to gather their thoughts about how they want to approach that type of feedback. And when it comes time to complete it, if you happen to deploy it, for instance, on a learning management system, make sure they have sufficient time to go through the whole thing. And finally, a key approach here is to make sure that there's an open-ended space somewhere in this evaluation/feedback form to let them give you some open feedback, things that you didn't ask but they might like to offer. And then finally, I want to talk about one approach to this. It's known as a classroom assessment technique, or it goes by the acronym of CATS. It's from some research and theorizing by Angelo and Cross all the way back in 1993. And while this wasn't specifically directed to online feedback, it does give us some guidance. And they came up with 5 approaches, if you will, to solicit feedback from students. I like 3 of them that I use fairly regularly. They can be adapted to online. The first one is a stop, start, continue routine. And what that basically does is ask your students just very quickly, once, twice, 3 times a term, for what I'm doing online, tell me one thing you would like me to stop doing, one thing you would like me to start doing that I'm not doing, and then one thing that you really like that we should continue. And so it allows them across the course to give you an idea of something that you think is working really well might show up in half the classes. Nah, just stop it, it doesn't work. On the other hand, there may be things that they're seeing in other classes that they like and that help them that you never thought of. So they might tell you to start doing something. So in any event, it's a nice way to keep it quick, keep it focused, but allow them to give you useful feedback on what's good, what's not there that could be good, and what probably isn't working the way you would like. Stop, start, continue. Assignment assessments are done kind of on an interim basis, and that really is when you've put together an assignment, give them a chance to tell you how the assignment or the day's work, if you happen to put it in a daily form, is working for them. So how well did this help you learn? Did it help you learn, and how? Or how do you think this assignment could have been improved? Now, this is not course specific, it's more assignment specific and how you're setting up the work routines for your students. So it can be deployed a couple times during the term. And then finally, this is kind of a daily routine that you can pull out of your pocket. And the way I like to use it is the following. It's called Muddiest Point. And in a face-to-face class, you might ask students as they left, almost like an exit ticket, what's the one thing that you're troubled by or you didn't get or is muddy to you right now? And then you can work on that before the next class to make sure you clear that up for them. In an online class, you can take another step and ask them to do that online. What's the muddiest point of today's lesson? And then think about how you might approach that in a different fashion. So if you did it using text or a discussion board, and you find that 3 or 4 of your students find that to be a really muddy point, try cleaning it up between now and the next class with a screencast or an audio file. Ask the students at the next class if that helped, and if so, why? Because you may find that you're relying upon one approach, text, when your students are learning better via audio or video, or could go the other way. You're relying too much on audio or video, and it's really not clarifying it for them. So muddiest point. Again, these are just kind of 3 quick ways to do this that focus in a little bit more than a general course assessment. So look, if you really want this to work, you have to be open and honest in terms of telling them what you're using it for. You have to be willing to use their feedback to improve the course. But you also need to put what they tell you in effect, because if you don't, they'll figure out that you really aren't interested in their feedback. You're just kind of playing a game. On the other hand, if you honestly solicit feedback from them, try and incorporate it, describe to them what you heard and what you're trying to do, you're going to find you're going to get a great benefit in terms of student engagement in your course. And again, since that's such a key predictor of course outcomes and students staying with your course, that's always worth the investment. Karen Lewis, in a little bit of research that she put together, I think put it just as well as it can be. If you're going to take the time to do the steps and take the effort needed to solicit that feedback, as Lewis says, perhaps the most important part of conducting a mid-semester feedback session is your response to the students. In your response, you need to let them know what you learned from their information and what differences it will make.